Greetings, folks online. We're going to get started here. I'm in a rap now about our mission of Napa-Solano Audubon. But the key is we are endeavoring to go on a statewide event, which is a breeding bird atlas for the entire state of California. You might not know this, but California is one of the few states that has never done a statewide breeding bird atlas. There's only about 15 states that haven't done that. So fortunately, a friend, Van Pirel, I can never pronounce his last name, it's a long last name, but he has organized a statewide breeding bird atlas for California, and he has pulled in grant money to pay for Cornell's Laboratory of Ornithology eBird state portal. And so all you have to do is be able to use eBird, and you can contribute important scientific data for breeding birds in our counties, and if you go to other counties, in those counties too. So it's an exciting project. It's going to be about 5 years of data collection. And actually, Napa-Solano Audubon, thanks to Robin Leong in the back somewhere, has already done a breeding bird atlas for our two counties, but one of the Napa one is 30 years old. So that was the baseline. So now we need another one to see what's happening to birds over these last 30 years. And the Solano County one, I think, was 15 to 20 years ago. So they both need to be redone, because if you have your ear to the ground in terms of conservation, we've lost a lot of habitat. In the last couple of decades, we've lost over 4 billion birds in the United States. It's really tragic, and it really reflects the loss of habitat. There's other factors too, like outdoor cats may be responsible for killing as many as 1 billion birds a year. So we're trying to encourage every cat owner to keep their cats inside, or to have a little cat what do you call it? Catio outside that the cat stays in to keep them from hunting songbirds especially. But anyways, I hope everyone online can hear me, and we're gaining lots of people online too. So you're going to speak to about 60 people, Aaron, so don't get nervous over there, okay? So anyways, the Breeding Bird Atlas is huge. We are very happy to train you in the use of eBird and how you use it. But right now, if you are in this state and sign into eBird, when you're in the field, if you click on more details about a bird and you click on one of the breeding bird hierarchical behaviors, the simplest is it flew over my head. Then it's singing on territory. Then it's singing in a territory for 7 days. Then it's nesting material in its mouth, or you find a nest, or you find actually eggs in a nest, or a mother incubating, or fledglings. So it's hierarchical up to they're leaving the nest. So it's very simple. You just click on the dot, and there it is. You've done the research that's really critical. Marin County, I think, just finished a breeding bird atlas, but they're going to do it again as part of the statewide event. So that's my plug for the Breeding Bird Atlas. But if you're interested in helping us, contact me, contact us. Our website has all of our contact information. Just go to the contacts, click on my name, and up pops my email. So you can contact me that way. Let's see. All right, I hope everyone that's a member received our spring newsletter. A lot of really fun articles in that newsletter. It's a big team that puts that together, and it's always a lot of fun. In case you don't know, Andrew Ford is a great ornithologist. He works in the scientific field, and he leads a bird walk every single week on Saturdays or Sundays in one of the nice places to go birding in either Napa or Solano County, or slightly further afield. And then we also have beginner bird walks that Carol Boykin, who's sitting over here reading her phone, helps to organize and lead. Tom Sliker is in Texas, so I'm going to take his place. We have one Sunday, Might rain on Sunday, but it looks like there's a window of good weather from 9 to 11 or 12. So all of the beginner walks right now are in American Canyon wetlands. And when the birds diminish and vacate the wetlands, then we may move it over to Benicia State Park. In addition, we have our monthly field trips, as I was mentioning. The Mount Diablo trip is April 23rd. It's a Thursday because Mount Diablo State Park fills up with lots of people on the weekends, so we're going to have a Thursday trip. Looking around the room, it looks like quite a few of us are retired, so we can go on a Thursday. But Mitchell Canyon, if you've never been there, is on the north side of Mount Diablo. There's a stream running through there. I think it's called Deer Flat Creek, and it's just filled with bird songs. And the third week of April is one of the best weeks to go there. Hammond's flycatchers are migrating through on their way up to the Sierras. We always see Hammonds at that time. Calliope hummingbirds are migrating through, and we go up this canyon into the chaparral, so we'll see California thrashers, we'll probably hear bell sparrows and rufous crowned sparrows, and with luck, we'll find a calliope. That's hit or miss. If you go in the middle of the night, you can find poor wills and screech owls and a lot of other things, coyotes. But there's a lot of migrating warblers the third week in April too, a lot of the western warblers, Townsend's, Nashville, black-throated gray, and warblers like that. So it's really fun. Lazuli buntings are arriving, so we should be able to see some of those as well. All right, so we are having an upcoming board election. We're doing everything we can humanly possible to encourage people in this audience to join the board, because some of us have been on it a long time and we're getting very old and we need to bring up some replacements. But the easiest way to join the board is to be a director. You have no job responsibilities other than coming to the board meetings and giving us your 2 cents. So if you're interested in helping out with the management of Napa-Solano Audubon, please consider getting a hold of Regina Brinker, who's the admin assistant for us right now, and her contact information's on the website too, and say, hey, I'd like to be a director. That's about how difficult it is, and we'll welcome you. Okay. Oh, a very important announcement. Our next meeting is breaking with tradition. We usually meet on the second Thursday of the month. We're meeting on the first Thursday for May, just because that worked better for the speaker. And the speaker is a great guy. His name is Benny Isaac Jacobs Schwartz. I ran into him at the Biggest Week one year, about 10 years ago. And he was just a young birder then with a camera and taking awesome pictures. And he's blossomed into a really well-known birder who speaks all over the country now. And he's going to speak to us about transforming your backyards into bird-friendly habitat. So if you're a botanist, like some of the people that are here, or like the botanical gardens at the state park, we're hoping, in fact, it may be, there's one speaker who calls it Bird's Last Hope. Bird's last hope is that we all create our bird habitat, bee habitat, butterfly habitat in our yards, because we're losing that habitat in the natural world. So come join us. So the date for next talk is May the 7th. So it's the 7th, it's the last day of the first week for that meeting. So we alternate meetings between Benicia, right here, and in Napa, we meet at the Napa Valley Lutheran Church, which is on Jefferson Street on the corner of, I think it's, what's the other street? Elm, there you go, thank you. Okay, so I think I've said enough about Benny, other than this guy's been all over the world. Central America, South America. He leads tours into the Colombian Andes. He's a really exciting guy to listen to. So come next month, May 7th, 7 o'clock, Napa Valley Lutheran Church. So tonight, we are honored to have Aaron Haiman here. I pronounced his last name right this time. And he has just written the book, Birds of the California Delta, which there's copies over here if you're interested in. But I don't even know do you live in Davis area?
West Sacramento.
West Sacramento. So he's living right in the Delta, and he's studied the birds of the Delta. He's an incredible birder. He leads a team of young kids that try to beat the team that I lead some of the time, the Yams, and they usually beat us because they're birding Marin rather than Sonoma. But anyways, a great birder. He is a water specialist, and he's learning, he's a specialist that works for the state in terms of the water board, is that right? So
Wildlife conservation.
there you go. Okay, so he knows a lot about fish too. We'll forgive him for that. But the Delta is really a complex place. You know that the salt water comes in with the tides and mixes with the fresh water, so it's brackish water. It complicates the soil issues there, but it also brings in multiple bird species that are really fun. So we lead at least 2 trips out to the valley almost every winter. We're going up north to Sacramento National Wildlife and Gray Lodge, and going down south to Cosumnes. And those are really fun trips. We try to find sandhill cranes. We try to find all kinds of geese and ducks and have just a great time. So without further ado, Aaron, do I need to say anything else? He's got a BS in environmental science from Berkeley. He has an MS in avian science and animal behavior from Davis. So he knows way more than I do. And I'm really proud to introduce Aaron Haiman to you.
We'll launch into this anyway. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. My name is Aaron Haiman, and what I was hoping to go through with you tonight was a few different things. One, give a sort of more full introduction to myself a little bit, tell you about what I'm up to these days, talk a little bit about what a delta is in general, and then jump into our very special delta that we have in the center of our state.
Yes.
How's that? Is that better out there in
Yes, thank you.
Interlands? There's 25 or 30 people out there too.
Brilliant. All right, so people on Zoom, if I do hang on a second.
Are you hitting arrows?
Yeah, I am. Drag to move this. That's not what I want though.
Their way past
Everything is fine.
Placer County, Yuba County, as well as Sierra and Nevada counties will
So
also
you're trying
have
to
the chance for
just announce it, correct?
after the
Yeah,
goes
just
down.
finishing the slides.
Thunderstorm activity will continue past midnight tonight. Then it should taper off some, and then we get into
Oh, I just
Here's
have
Friday
this.
afternoon.
Okay, cool.
A lot more
All right.
activity is expected to pick up
And
through Friday.
could whoever is on Zoom double check that you're muted, because we're getting at least one person's sound through.
Thunderstorm possibilities are going to be there for Friday, so another very
And it
active
sounds like the
day.
news. If somebody's listening to the news, you can mute yourself, that'd be awesome.
Now, Saturday.
But yeah, so jumping into
Roberto, mute.
ourselves.
Roberto, mute yourself.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was.
You're not.
Apologize.
You're not. There we go. We got it.
Talk a little bit about the birds of the Delta, and in particular, I want to focus on just 5 particular birds that are under a special threat right now. Talk about sort of threats to the Delta in general, so that's kind of the downer part of the evening. But then we end on a high note, because there's a lot of really exciting work going on restoring the Delta, bringing it back to what it sort of was in its former glory. And so I want to take you through a habitat restoration project and kind of some of the other efforts going on right now to bring the Delta back. Let's see if this works for me. Hey! So my background, I was homeschooled early on and during that homeschooling period, I volunteered all over the place. I volunteered with Point Blue Conservation Science. I volunteered with Golden Gate Raptor Observatory. Lots of bird-focused stuff. I was very bird-obsessed from a very early age. And that obsession really never left. And I carried on with that obsession through going to College of Marin, where I did my associate's work before transferring to UC Berkeley, as was mentioned. and where I studied urban Cooper's hawks for my senior thesis, so sticking with birds, and then on to UC Davis after a few internships, also studying birds. And at Davis, I actually ended up with 2 master's degrees, one in avian science and one in animal behavior. And the animal behavior, the animals that I was studying, I will shock no one, were birds. So those internships were really fun. I kind of bounced around the continent, going and working with various organizations or universities, studying various bird and bird conservation related topics. After graduate school, I got a job briefly with the Department of Water Resources, and that really launched my stay with the state. After working with them doing fish surveys and bird surveys, I got a job with the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy. And that's really where I got my feet wet in the Delta. Yeah, thank you. I was working on a lot of habitat restoration projects all over the Delta. That was what I was hired to do. And it was a really inspiring, exciting position to be in. And I kind of kept on doing that work at the Wildlife Conservation Board, where I am now, where I'm also doing habitat restoration, this time now focused on streams and rivers and going statewide.
I'm going to make sure that we are,
Recording.
yep, we should be, but I don't see it. So, go ahead, you can keep talking.
Can we advance the slide?
Yep,
Does that work?
it should.
There we go. So alongside of,
Mark, it shows recording in progress on my screen.
Okay, perfect,
Lovely.
thanks. Yep.
alongside that educational sort of career stuff, I'm also really inspired and interested in science communication and getting knowledge out there to as wide an audience as I possibly can. And so I started writing a blog when I was in graduate school and have sort of continued doing that on and off. But then sort of built and kind of kept expanding to more and more platforms on social media. And I have a YouTube channel, all under the title A Birding Naturalist. And so I'm pretty active on social media if you want to care to find me there ever. And there we go. I also often lead bird walks with all sorts of different groups. I lead this youth birdathon team called the Drakes Beach Sanderlings every year for Point Blue Conservation Science. And they've been a really awesome, inspiring group of kids. And it's been really amazing to see sort of these groups of kids come in, and of course kids get older over the years. And then they go off and do amazing stuff afterwards. So it's a really cool process to be a small part of. And then most recently, I've written a book about the birds of the California Delta. And this book came to be in a wonderful partnership between myself and this incredible scientific illustrator who was born and raised and lives in Costa Rica, and who I met through the wonders of the internet. And we worked together on a smaller project, and then when this book idea came along, I reached out to her and said, "You want to do something kind of crazy with me?" And she said yes. And so she's the one responsible for all of the beautiful works of art that are in this book and that make it really as gorgeous as it is. Those are all Martha Espinosa's work. And if you care to wander over to her website at some point, you will not be disappointed. It was published by Heyday Books, which is a small independent publisher in Berkeley, California. And they have this series of books, which they refer to as hyper-local birding. And it's where they get somebody who knows the birds of a specific area, sometimes a very small geographic area. And they ask that person not to write a comprehensive field guide of every species of bird you could possibly see in that area, but rather to pick 25 species that really highlight the story of that area and tell the stories of those specific birds. And so that's what mine is, 25 species that really characterize the Delta in some way and tell its story in some fashion. And so that was what sort of launched, that was the idea behind the book. The fifth book in the series, mine was the fourth one. The fifth book is actually about to come out. It's Birds of Santa Cruz. So that's the next one that is coming out really soon, and keep your eyes open for. That one. And throughout all of my work, both in terms of my professional career, my education, my social media, science communication stuff, I really think that birding is for everyone and everybody. So I'm all for throwing the doors open, being as inclusive and welcoming to everybody as I possibly can, because I have definitely gotten a lot out of birds and birding, both personally and professionally out of my life, and I think everybody else deserves the same interests and opportunities if they want to. But all right, with me out of the way, what the heck is a delta? Fundamentally, the definition, like the simplest definition of a delta is it's a tract of sediment deposited at the mouth of a river. Now, most often we think of a place where rivers flow into oceans, and that's where deltas form. But it's not the only place. Deltas can also form where a river flows into a lake or another large body of water, or even where one river meets another river. So deltas can form in a different variety of places, but it's always where the water is slowing down so that sediment sifts out and deposits out. And people noticed as they looked at deltas over the centuries, that deltas often form a particular shape. And in fact, if you look at deltas around the world, they pretty much all have their own special shape, this triangle. And in fact, that triangle is exactly where we get the name delta from, because it is, after all, the capital form of the fourth letter of the Greek alphabet, alpha, beta, gamma, delta. And so when people were noticing, hey, these rivers form these triangular shapes of sediment, what should we call it? Well, we have a name for a triangle, we'll use that. Now that brings us to our delta, which is a little bit special because it's not a triangle like the most of the other deltas in the world form. So ours is a weird delta for a lot of reasons, but that's what makes it special, and that's why we love it. It's of course right at the center of California, and it also forms sort of the beating heart of California's water system in a lot of ways. It's this incredible network of diverse habitats in this complex landscape of waterways and islands, little sloughs, big open bodies of water, all sorts of stuff that all comes together and includes a lot of stuff beyond the water itself. These islands, sometimes they're quite big, and sometimes the edges aren't actually islands, and they bleed off into grasslands and oak savannas, all sorts of other additional habitats, some of which include ones that we live in. So it's an incredible place with a lot in it, which makes it a really interesting place to bird in a lot of ways, because over the course of a pretty short period of time, an hour or two, you can drive through a whole bunch of different habitats and see a whole bunch of different birds. Now, our delta formed kind of because of this unique geologic history of California. About 100 million years ago, the Sierra Nevada mountains were shoved up by plate tectonics. At that time, the western slope of the Sierras basically led down to a floodplain that was just broad and wide and led all the way to the ocean, and just met the Pacific Ocean. Nothing very exciting, just a long flat plain. But that all changed about 5 million years ago when more plate tectonic activity sort of crumpled up the edge of California and formed the Coast Range. But it wasn't forceful enough to completely compact the state, and so it left this interesting pattern where you have this crumpled up edge, a big flat area in the middle, and then more mountains after that. So Coast Range, Central Valley, Sierra Nevadas. About 10,000 years ago, things got more exciting because the whole place filled with ice in the Ice Age, and that served to grind down, all those glaciers ground down the Central Valley even further, so it really flattened it out. And also, it meant that something really exciting happened when those glaciers retreated. As those glaciers pulled back and exposed the western flank of the Sierras and the eastern flank of the Coast Range, they allowed a lot of rivers to form in those exposed areas. Like a lot of rivers. California's got a ton of rivers, and most of our big rivers all flow eventually, one way or the other, into each other in the Central Valley, and then eventually out through the Carquinez Strait and into the bay. Those rivers carried inorganic sediment from the Sierras and the Coast Range down into this sort of flat pan area that we know as the Central Valley. And that sediment wasn't able to wash away because of that just narrow little opening, which has changed over the years. For a while, when the sort of Central Valley first formed, the way out was actually to Monterey Bay. That was the lowest spot. But plate tectonics shifted things around. Monterey got a little higher. San Francisco dropped a little bit, and that was suddenly the bottom of the bathtub, and that's where the now current drain of the Central Valley is. As all that sediment sifted in though, and that water flowed down out of the mountains, carrying that sediment, slowing down, dropping the sediment in layer after layer after layer, plants started to grow out of that sediment. And as those plants grew and died and grew and died, they contributed organic matter. And so you have this amazing mix of inorganic and organic all mixing together, all forming layer and layer and layer and layer and layer on top of each other, until you have like sometimes 50, 60 feet deep of incredible soil. And it's not just any kind of soil, it forms this special kind of soil called peat soil. And peat soil is really cool for a bunch of different reasons. One, with all of those inorganic and organic sediments mixing together, it becomes really nutrient rich. It's a really wonderful soil. Humans have been living on and around deltas for thousands of years and have been growing a lot of food in deltas for thousands of years. And that is equally true of our delta. It supports an incredible array of habitats, and it's also really high in nitrogen and also really high in carbon. And that carbon especially, at really high concentrations of carbon in peat soils, is going to be really important in a little while, so remember that. Now, all that incredible soil, I mean, we have been using it for agriculture, and that's great, but we are hardly the only things that benefit from a rich soil. Tons of different types of habitat grow up in our delta. Everything from wetlands, riparian forests, gallery forests, open savanna grasslands, vernal pools, amazing levels of diversity of different types of habitat all in this tight area. And that tight diversity of habitat supports an incredible diversity of living organisms. Tons of plants, some of which are pretty rare and some of which are found in very limited places, such as the delta. Mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. Insects, some of which are also only endemic, only found in the delta. We have fish, migratory and resident, coming through and into the delta. And of course, birds, tons and tons of birds flying into and living in the delta. And part of the reason it's so important for birds is its position on the Pacific Flyway. As I'm sure most of you are familiar with, we live on this super highway of birds called the Pacific Flyway, which links 3 different continents together and is used by hundreds of species and millions of individuals every single year. It's an incredible linkage of sort of the ecosystems of the world, tying the geography of the world together. And of course, not every single species is going to use every single mile of that superhighway. Some of them do, but most of them don't. But if you link all those bits and pieces together, you get this incredible movement of birds across the globe. And the delta is smack on the Pacific Flyway. We right now are smack on the Pacific Flyway, which means that, and because of sort of the mid-latitude position of the delta, it means that we've got migrants coming through both directions, winter and spring, or fall and spring. And also we have residents here that live here all year long. And also, we're also a destination, both during the breeding season and also during the wintering season for various species coming from various directions. And that's one of the ways that I like to kind of split up the 250 or so species of birds that frequently, regularly occur in the delta. There are those summer visitors, birds that come generally from points south to the delta as their final ultimate destination to breed, to raise babies, find mates, do all the things that birds do to raise the next generation. There are winter visitors that are coming generally from points north, and this is the final destination of their trip, where they spend the winter hanging out, resting, getting food, relaxing, recharging their batteries so they're ready to migrate back north and carry on the generations. And in fact, carrying on is a really interesting term when it comes to winter in particular. More and more research has come out looking at things called carryover effects, where what happens to a bird in one part of its life cycle can often have a really big impact on the next, or even the next after that, part of its life cycle. So people have found that when birds have a really bad, a really rough winter, when they don't get the rest they need, when they don't get the fuel that they need, they have higher mortality on their spring migration back. And even the ones that make it will often have lower reproductive success. They'll have fewer chicks. That obviously has a big impact on the next generation and sort of the continuation of the species. Whereas birds that have a really robust, wonderful winter, and they get all the rest they need, and they get lots of fuel, and they're just totally pumped up and ready to go, have a much higher success on their spring migration back to their breeding grounds. And when they get there, they raise more babies. So carryover effects become very, very important. And of course, in the belt delta, the other 2 categories we also have. We've got our spring and fall migrants. Birds just zoom through here. They are not stopping here. They got places to be, things to do. And in spring or in fall, they are on their way. So they are here for a little bit, and that does mean that we represent an important link in their chain of movement, but they aren't sticking around. And then we have like the exact opposite strategy of those, the birds that have realized that, like many of us have, that Central California is a wonderful place to live, and why would you bother going anywhere else? And so they just live here. 12 months out of the year, they're just our resident neighbors. Now, unfortunately, some of our birds are not doing as well as others. And one way of thinking about how birds are doing kind of at a wide angle lens is by looking at something called the State of the Birds report. This is something put out by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and the 2025 State of the Birds report is still the most current at this point. And it has a very wide angle lens look at species, and it says, okay, generally speaking, how are these birds doing? What is this population level changes for this individual species and that individual species? And it groups them into different categories. They're the green species, which are basically doing just fine. Don't have to worry about them too much. There are yellow alert species, which are maybe having some concerning trends, but nothing too serious. Orange alert birds, which are, even more concerning. And then there's the red alert species. And the red alert species, and this is just a direct quote from the State of the Birds report, birds with perilously low populations and steep declining trends. So small numbers and going in the wrong direction. And we have 5 of those red alert species in the Delta. And so those are the ones I want to quickly run through with you all. One of them, to my surprise and sadness, is the yellow-billed magpie. This, by the way, is one of the images in my book by Martha Espinosa. This is one of our California endemics, one of the 2 species of birds that are found in California and nowhere else on the planet. A very, very special bird for us. Living native in sort of savanna grasslands a lot of the time, but they're also pretty darn adaptable. They've moved into a lot of human areas. I've got a decent flock of them just a few blocks from my house in West Sacramento, all pounding around railroad tracks and garbage cans and stuff. And in part, that adaptability to a certain extent is actually one of the reasons why they're in trouble. Because they have a small geographic range, so that's concerning. And they get hit hard by some diseases like West Nile virus and avian influenza and some others. So that's also concerning. They also end up coming in contact with rodenticides pretty frequently because they are corvids, they're clever, they're problem solvers, they're innovative. They'll often find new and interesting and clever ways of finding food. And sometimes that means looking into rat traps or finding rats that are maybe not doing very well because they've been poisoned, but the bird doesn't know that. And so thinking they've scored an easy meal there. And so they get sort of the secondary contact with those rodenticides. And that can be a really big problem for them. And also raptors, other animals that are going to be eating those poisoned rodents. And then, of course, as was mentioned, habitat loss is a thing you're going to see over and over and over again. Habitat loss is always probably one of the biggest #1 reasons why any species is declining. It just doesn't have enough space to live in. The second red alert species I want to talk about is a tricolored blackbird. This is almost endemic to California. Not quite, but almost. And historically, this is a bird that nested in wetlands in tremendous colonies, huge colonies. And there were, if you go back 150 years, you could find entire colonies of red-winged blackbirds with sometimes as many as 300,000 individuals packed together, densely nesting together, calling together. They were supposed to be tremendously noisy places, really amazing breeding colonies. Many of our birds go out to Outer Point Rays for the winter, which is kind of a fun California connection, come to the Central Valley to breed and go out to the grasslands out in the Outer Point Rays to spend their winter. Unfortunately, that whole movement now, the whole statewide population, is down to about 300,000. So about what one colony used to be is now all of the tricolored blackbirds we have left. It's being considered for federal listing. It's already listed under the state as a state threatened species. So that's cool. That brings attention and conservation effort to the species, which is great. At this point, who knows what's going to happen to a federal application? So I wouldn't hold my breath. But what's wrong is those wetlands and where these birds breed. So we've lost a ton of the wetlands in Central California. Something like 95% of our wetlands are gone. And then a lot of those have been converted into various forms of agriculture, which causes sort of another special problem for this species because it has learned that there are some crops that are close enough to wetlands in structure that they'll accept it and they'll breed there. But that lines them up for the problem that oftentimes their breeding time and their nesting time is the same time as harvest time for that crop. And so now we're faced with a problem where the farmer has to say, okay, do I forego my income to allow the birds to remain? Do I destroy a colony to bring my crop in? It's a tight spot to be in. There are a lot of really clever people working on this, trying to figure out ways of subsidizing farmers to maybe lessen the financial blow, maybe adjusting what crops are being harvested so that maybe they can mature a little bit later after the birds have gone, maybe trying to do things around the edges of fields to attract the birds out of the center and have them breed around the edges so the farmers can still have the center. Lots of different options going on. It's an active problem, but it's definitely one that is impacting tricolor blackbirds today. Another of our red alert species, the Ridgway's rail, found across California and also in these little scattered spots and also some other scattered spots in other western states. This is a tidal species, so this is not going to be a species that you find really up in the upper watersheds or upper even part of the delta. This is a tidal bird. It is already federally threatened, so that's cool. That one went through before. Habitat restoration and habitat destruction, sorry, not restoration. Habitat restoration would be great. Habitat destruction is a problem. And also, mentioned cats earlier. Cats are a big problem for this particular species. This is one that nests on the ground, and so feral cats can very easily attack the adults occasionally, but definitely destroy the young and the eggs, and so they're very impacted by cats and also dogs as well. So it's a good reminder, keep cats inside. Catios are fantastic, and keep dogs on leash. Also, being so tidally dependent and sort of in the water all the time, these birds are also in contact with a lot of pollutants, waterborne pollutants. And so that is another thing that negatively impacts their sort of ability to thrive. Bird number 4 of our red alert species is the mountain plover. Beautiful bird with what I think is a lousy name because they're mostly often found in grasslands. Some of those grasslands are in the mountains, but some of them aren't. They aren't specifically mountainous. They arrive in the Delta in early November, and these are sort of one of our winter visitors. And for being, in many ways, as common, and I'm not common, but as easy to find as they are when you really want to go looking for them, they're a remarkably understudied species. We don't really know much about their migration. We don't know a lot about their breeding ecology sort of details, or their winter ecology even. So if anybody knows a graduate student looking for a cool bird to study, I would nominate mountain plover as a high level option. And they are again facing issues with habitat destruction. A lot of the lands that they live in, those beautiful meadows and stuff, are places that we like to live, so we build in them, and that's not great. We also convert a lot of those lands to agriculture, which is a mixed bag. These are birds that do perfectly fine in like cattle ranches, so that kind of agriculture, cool. Especially during the wintertime, these birds can live alongside cattle pastures just fine. But if those cattle pastures get converted into like a vineyard, that pretty much has no habitat value from the point of view of a mountain plover at all. And so they lose out big there. And then being so close to those areas where we live and where we often spray pesticides, they often also become contact with pesticides as well. And again, that impacts their ability to thrive. And our 5th and final red alert species, the Allen's hummingbird. This is not really resident in the Delta, but it is a migratory bird through zipping back and forth. And the ones that we have generally go from sort of Mexico and they go out to the coast where they breed. They breed on the coast of Oregon and California. And they spend their winters in sort of central Mexico mostly. Which puts us right in their migratory path, which is a good reminder that, this is a place where even though they're not here very long, making sure that they have what they need when they are here is incredibly important. It may not look like it from a sort of point of view of a calendar, but it really is from a point of view of life cycles of a bird. Unfortunately, they've had a pretty steep population decline for the past several decades. Habitat loss due to development is a big one. These birds like to live where we humans like to live, and that's bad for a few different reasons. One is if you build houses across an area, that's going to really reduce the habitat value for an Allen's hummingbird. And also, Allen's hummingbirds, especially during their breeding season, seem to be a lot less tolerant of us humans than other hummingbird species. Anna's hummingbirds, like the other common ones we've all seen them. They're all over the place. They'll breed like practically right next to you. They don't care at all. Allen's hummingbirds disagree. They like to be in places that are much less disturbed by humans. And as more and more humans fill an area, those less disturbed areas get smaller and smaller and fewer and fewer. The fact that they come zipping through the delta, though, is another good reminder that if you plant native plants, right, it was a mention of bringing sort of more natives, more habitat diversity, more bird and pollinator support to your yards, that can play a really important role for birds like the Allen's hummingbird, the sort of so-called homegrown national park, as I've heard it referred to sometimes. Because if you take all of our yards and add them all together, they're equivalent in size to some of our larger national parks. So if we all did our individual little pieces, we could have a very large scale impact. And the impact on these birds is one of those. So moving out from birds to sort of the delta as a whole, we could be here all night long talking about all of the threats of to the delta. There's a giant list. It goes on and on. It gets very depressing. We would be sad and exhausted by the end of it. We're not going to do that. I want to focus on just two that I think are really important in the delta and also that are often overlooked or misunderstood. And those are subsidence and saltwater intrusion. So subsidence is the sinking of land. It's when land drops in elevation. This can happen for a few reasons. As winds blow topsoil away, that can cause the surface area to drop. As you remove water from ground, those spaces that were filled with water collapse, and so the land drops. These are forms of subsidence. We have those in the delta, but we have a driver of subsidence that is bigger than those other ones and very, very different. And that all has to do with our peat soils and all that carbon that I mentioned earlier on. Because something really weird happens when you dry out peat soils. So when Europeans came to the delta, they saw a delta, and they were like, well, we know deltas. Deltas are great places to grow food. We're going to do that. But most of the crops that we rely on don't like to live in like that drowned, completely saturated soil. Up here, this top level, this is kind of the historic condition where the soil was basically at the same elevation as the water. It was an island technically, but just barely. The whole area was really, really wet. And so to dry out that soil, people used natural levees and also then built and improved them, and then started pumping water out of the middle to kind of dry it out. So like I said, you pull water out, that'll cause some subsidence. But the bigger problem is once those soils dried out, there are a lot of microbes that will get into those carbon-rich peat soils and start consuming the carbon. And they have a metabolic process very similar to ours where they take in carbon and they breathe out carbon dioxide. And so they converted the carbon in that peat soil into carbon dioxide gas, and literally dozens of feet of soil just floated away. This has had such a big impact that, one, some of those islands in the center and western delta are now 20, 30, 40 feet below sea level. Also, that's actually a pretty significant addition to the state's greenhouse gas emissions. It's the equivalent of about 267,000 cars driving for a year is how much we lose in CO2 emissions off the delta. So it's a huge, huge impact. And of course, it sets up kind of this disaster scenario where when you do this for a while, this area drops lower and lower and lower. The water on the outside certainly isn't dropping. And so the pressure on those levees gets more and more and more. And if a levee does break, say, I don't know, maybe an earthquake happens because we're in California, then that levee destabilizes. The water starts rushing through and completely fills the inside area, that lowered inside area of the island. And it doesn't stop there because water has a lot of power. So when a lot of water comes rushing into one of these islands and floods it, it'll often have enough force to break out the levee on the other side and then break out the levee on the island next door. And you get this sort of domino effect where one levee break can result in the loss of many islands. This is a disaster scenario that a lot of hydrologic engineers in the Delta stay up late worrying about and sweating about. And of course, when that does happen, and it has happened a few times in the Delta, there are areas in the Delta where, like, for example, Frank's Tracks right here, that used to be an island. There was a big levee break, the whole thing flooded. It was deemed too dangerous and too expensive to repair that levee, and so people just abandoned it and left it alone, and now it's just a big open chunk of water in the middle of the delta. That chunk of water is useful for some birds, diving ducks, that kind of thing. It's not nearly as biodiverse in the birds that it supports as those non-flood islands, though. Way more species are going to live here than are going to live here. And so if we lose more and more of those islands, we're losing more and more of that high value, high biodiversity areas and converting into these open water areas with much less, especially bird abundance supported. So subsidence is a big problem. How do we fix subsidence? Well, the most obvious thing would be to build the soil back up, right? That's what the problem was. The soil disappeared, put it back. But building soil is a very slow process. It formed naturally over tens of thousands of years, sometimes in some cases millions of years. That's not something we're going to replicate in a human lifespan or anything. A lot of people are working on how to reverse subsidence and trying to figure out different crops and different plants that you can place in a landscape to help build up soil as fast as possible. Right now, the fastest best bet is tules. They seem to build more soil than any other plant. But even tules only add soil at about a centimeter a year. And when you're talking 40 feet, that's a lot of years. So it's an ongoing problem, and it's definitely concerning because we do live in an earthquake-prone area. That is not a wildly unlikely thing to have a fair-sized earthquake destabilize one or two levees and cause catastrophic failure in a large portion of our delta. Saltwater intrusion is a fun one. So rivers carry fresh water down from the mountains, and they flow together. And these color coordinations relate to salinity. So the bluer the color, the fresher the water. The redder the color, the saltier the water. And so not surprisingly, the salt water is all out in the bay, and the fresh water is all coming down from the mountains. And the force of all of that water coming together and flowing out kind of has like a fire hose kind of effect where it holds the salt water in place. Yes, there is tidal action. Yes, those colors sort of shift back and forth a little bit over the course of every single day. But it's not a whole ton. It's kind of basically kind of held in place in kind of the same area. And that's because of all that fresh water pushing in against the ocean, fundamentally pushing against it. So you can imagine what would happen if the flows of many of those rivers dropped, if the force of that fresh water lessened. The salt water would intrude farther. That would have a lot of really terrible effects. I mean, for one thing, it's really rough to drink salt water. I don't know if you've ever tried it. I don't recommend it. Also, growing plants in salty soil doesn't really work very well. In fact, it's a total failure for many crops. And the ecology of the delta has evolved around this gradation of salty to fresh water. And there are lots of species that look for their particular level of saltiness. And because they've evolved there over millions of years, they kind of know where to find it. But if that suddenly moved dramatically, there's no guarantee those species would be able to find their level of saltiness again, if that level of saltiness even exists anymore. So keeping kind of that balance is a really important part of the delta. And it's a really important issue with saltwater intrusion as we sort of have this tendency to continue diverting our fresh water out of these rivers to more and more other uses. That means that it's not functioning in this use to hold the saltwater at bay. Saltwater at bay, because it's in the bay. That's funny. So with those threats, with those 5 species not doing well, they're concerning. Subsidence and saltwater intrusion, that's concerning. There are lots of other concerns like invasive species and tons of other stuff going on in the delta that's not great. There is, I'm happy to say, a lot of work to undo that, which is fantastic. One of the first places that people have started with is even just trying to define our delta and draw a line around it. This kind of represents the whole watershed, like the historic watershed of the delta, At one point, every drop of water that fell in that sort of darker area in the middle of this map eventually would make its way down through its various rivers into the Central Valley, into the Delta, and out into the bay. That's a huge area and not practical in a lot of reasons to try to like manage. And so the legal Delta was a much smaller area defined in 2009, and that was a good start. But the biggest one happened in 2019 when the US Congress recognized the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta National Heritage Area. And this is their outline. So when I'm generally talking about the Delta, that's kind of what I mean. And it's the first and only national heritage area in the state of California, which I think is pretty cool. And this is a quote that I just lifted straight out of the act that established the area. It is to highlight the area's rich tapestry of indigenous peoples and immigrants from around the world, natural beauty and wildlife and engineering marvels, bustling metropolitan areas, and picturesque rural towns. We've got it all here. And Congress decided it was worth protecting. And so this has been a really cool thing. The designation of this area has meant there's been increased attention, increased funding, increased work done in the Delta. And some of that work has included stuff that I have done. Habitat restoration is sort of the best pushback against all that habitat destruction that is impacting all these species of birds. This is a particular project that I managed. It was in this sort of urban creek that ran through Brentwood and Oakley. And you can see from the before picture, this was a creek in a channel that was designed for basically just one purpose, and that is to move stormwaters off of the city and out into the Delta as efficiently and quickly as possible. So it's got this steep sides, flat bottom, narrow channel. The channels are pretty darn straight. There's not a lot of meanders or anything going on here. This is a highly constrained, highly engineered creek. And all that constraining and all that engineering means it's not got a lot of great habitat potential. You can see that there is some vegetation in the middle, but not a lot. There's certainly no big trees. There's no shade going on in this area. That's just baking in the sun all summer long. And so it's just not great. So a group of people came together, including a local sort of Friends of the Creek group. The county was involved, the city was involved, and I at the state level was involved. And for about a mile of this creek, designed a project that would set those trails on both sides back a ways, re-sculpt the banks, so instead of being those really steep sides, it was much, much shallower, put in some benches so that there was places where the water could come in, flood up when rains do come, but then that water could spread out across a little floodplain, slow down. It also meant that this creek had space to just sort of start to build its own little meanders and function a lot more creek-like. We planted something like 1,000 trees. I have no idea how many shrubs, and literally hundreds of pounds of native grasses and plant seeds. And I went back to the site about 8 years later and had these enormous cottonwoods growing up on either side. And there are complex dense stands of things like native California blackberry and elderberry. And underneath those, native grasses and forbs growing, wildflowers growing up. This incredible diversity of plants creating structure, shade, cooling the water. And those structures and all those sort of complexities from the plant perspective then played out to amazing results with the animals. We've had beavers coming in here. We've had salmon starting to explore up this creek. A level of bird diversity that is way higher in this after picture than anything that would have shown up in that before picture. And so getting to be involved in projects like this is really rewarding. And really, overall, 8 years, it's not that huge a length of time. It's not that bad. Those results are really pretty astounding. And this is just one of the projects that are on the landscape. This is a spattering of the projects that are currently working or in development just by the agency that I used to work for, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Conservancy. And you can see there's tons of them sort of splattered all over the Delta landscape. And that's just one agency. There are other state agencies, there are federal agencies, to a certain extent at the moment. But there are also nonprofits, cities, counties. There are lots of groups that are all working together to put as many of these landscape changing projects on the ground as possible. And when you put them all together, it has the potential to really shift the needle on a lot of the declines in the Delta. I will say that a lot of those projects, in fact, all of those projects, take money. It always comes down to money, right? And that is one place where we as Californians, where you all get to take credit for this, because we as Californians have a pretty darn good track record of putting our money where our mouth is when we say we value conservation. Over and over again, bonds and other election sort of measures show up on ballots and we vote for them. We say, yes, we want to spend money on this. So a lot of these projects were funded by a proposition called Proposition 1 that passed in 2014. It was fantastic and it did a ton of good work. Not this past November, but the November before that on the ballot, there was Proposition 4. And so if anybody here voted yes for Proposition 4, thank you very much, because that is another huge influx of money coming into California for habitat restoration, getting these amazing projects there in the landscape. So go you. And it works. Not only do all those habitat restoration projects have a really feel-good effect, and not only do they have sort of point-by-point area benefits, but on the broad scale, they actually do have impacts. Nuttall's woodpeckers are one of the near endemic species in California, very common in the Delta. They love oak woodlands, although they do not eat acorns. And they have had a population increase for several decades now. They've been on the rise. And that's fantastic. When you provide habitat for species, the species use it, they show up, it benefits them. It's great. Is it hard? Sometimes. Is it expensive? Almost always. Is it difficult? Sometimes. But does it work? Yes, it works. And another great example of that is the yellow-billed cuckoo. This is a bird, kind of a weird one, because back east, it's super common. They're all over the place and their population is doing fine. But out here in the west, very different story. There are these riparian specialists. And as that riparian forests have been degraded and destroyed, their populations have dramatically dropped to the point where now they're only found in a few isolated spots in a few counties across California. But, and again, this is another one where it's like a candidate for federal listing, but again, don't hold your breath. But one of the really cool things about yellow-billed cuckoos is their responsiveness to all those habitat restoration efforts. When you put the forests that they need back in the areas that they want them, you get everything right, which is a trick. But when you get it right, these birds have been seen showing up and using those restored habitats, sometimes just 3 years after they're installed. That's a really fast recovery response, and means that if we do more of it, there's every reason to believe they would continue to respond. And so we could pull this bird back from the brink in a really wonderful way. And so I would just like to close here with a quote that I open with my book, and that is, to hear some of our bird devotees talk, one would think that to be able to identify a bird is all of bird study. But on the contrary, the identification of birds is simply the alphabet to the real study, the alphabet by means of which we may spell the life habits of the birds. To know these habits is the ambition of the true ornithologist. And I would take that quote from Anna Comstock and expand it, not just to the true ornithologist, the true naturalist, the true herpetologist, the true mammologist, the true ecologist. Go farther than just identifying birds. Do things like the California Bird Atlas that you were talking about, where we're not just identifying things, we're also tracking where they're breeding, when are they breeding, how many are breeding in that area, getting more detailed information, which is something we can all do and all help with. And I think should be all of our, at least part, ambition. With that, if you do want to find me anywhere online, you can definitely find me. I'm very findable, and I'll have this slide up in just a second, but I want to say thank you to all very much. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be delighted to chat. And if you
I have a question.
questions and you're curious about a book, I've got books for sale if you want. You didn't say how much. Oh yes, sorry, good point. They're $25.
One thing I'd like to tie in with is some of the work that Napa-Solano Audubon has done.
Absolutely.
One of my predecessors, Wendy Sheckler, actually went around putting recording devices in tricolored blackbird colonies to try to understand the timing of when they built the nest, when the eggs were put in, and there's different sounds the birds make based on what's happening. And she's been instrumental in doing that with, I forget the name of the program, using speakers in the habitat to identify the bird there and the other season. So one of the goals is to try to get farmers to harvest a little later so that the tricolors can fledge and get out of there before they harvest. So probably people know, but in case you don't, at the corner of 113 and Hay Road is a dump. And that dump has a wastewater base. And in that wastewater is the colony of about 15,000 tricolored blackbirds. So it's out in Dixon area, south of Dixon. So 113 goes between and 12. And if you take 113 south from Dixon, or you come north from Highway 12, you hit the dump. And just south of the dump is this beautiful little wetland area, probably created by the dump, I'm not sure. It's the largest colony, and Wendy had me going and surveying the colonies. There were 4 colonies in Solano at that point, and now we're down to mostly just that one. Because Fairfield developed one, and the other one is on Creed Road. And that brings me to the fact that the big mega city that's being planned for Solano County is right in the heartland where the mountain plovers winter and where the few tricolored colonies, or one of the tricolored is along Creed Road. I don't know, do we have any hope against the mega city?
I think we do, yeah. Yeah. I think, is everybody familiar with California Forever and like the idea here? Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that there are several sort of procedural things that could slow down or stop it. And I also still think that there is a fair bit of hue and cry that we could all do, and we could probably all be better at, that could stop it in its tracks. Forced to like go and do properly, since they absolutely did not do it the first time. I think is going to be a challenge for them, because when it comes to environmental impacts, they're going to have, a few dozen.
And burrowing owls are another species that lives in those grasslands, and their population is really plummeted. Many of the burrowing colonies have disintegrated in the last 10 years.
And other species like swings and hawks, which are a species of special concern in California that would be impacted. Tons of impacts.
Is there any help for slowing down the rodenticide epidemic?
Definitely. There's a group actually that have been working on this for a while. They just passed, oh shoot, I can't remember the number of them, but there was a rodenticide ban that just came out recently. The group is called RATS. Raptors Are the Solution. And they're a fantastic organization. Check them out. Support anything that they want to do. Like they're working really hard to reduce the level of rodenticides that's used by anybody.
Right.
Yeah, rats are great. Rats are also great, but rats are great.
I was curious how the Delta was drought and how quickly it
Droughts. Yeah, so droughts are a big problem because the biggest way is because a big drought, like a statewide drought, dramatically impacts all that fresh water and the volumes of fresh water that are flowing down those rivers, right? Forget what we're taking out of the rivers. If the water isn't there in the first place, that's a huge problem. And it's definitely an impact. I will say that the Delta has shown itself to be pretty resilient to those levels of impacts, because I mean, droughts are getting worse and more extensive because of climate change, but they aren't inherently new. California has been hitting droughts periodically for hundreds of thousands of years at least. And so to a certain extent, the Delta kind of has some resilience to it, to those levels of perturbation. Now, are we going to hit a point with climate change where the droughts get so severe for so long that we sort of exceed those tolerances? Quite possibly, but we aren't there yet.
I know that there's a project further south where they set aside wetland areas that are like repositories for water in wet years. They're called, there's a term for them, and my brain doesn't function much anymore, but it's there. And for example, a roseate spoonbill turned up there.
Wow.
And a wood stork turned up there. And basically, yeah, we'll have to use eBird to remember the name of the place. But it's further south, down in the Bakersfield area. And they're basically repositories that when we have heavy snowfalls and lots of rain that year, it fills up the water table there, and they don't pump it out of there. It stays there and helps replenish the adjacent lands when we do have droughts.
Nice, yeah. Yeah, the more sort of groundwater recharge basins that we can establish.
It's a recharge area.
Yeah, the more we can get that water down under the soil and into the ground where it'll stay there, the better. Because that's one of the things that definitely cushions the Delta's resiliency to droughts.
So creating more of those, I think,
Absolutely.
would be huge.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's one thing that a lot of these restored wetlands do. Wetlands are great for being, this dense, peaty material, which is a huge sponge that holds a lot of water. So it's great. Wetlands are fantastic for that.
The other side of what you shared is sea level rise.
Yeah.
So I know Marin County is doing a tremendous amount of work with rebuilding the marshlands and planting all kinds of plants out in the marshlands to try to build up that buffer to slow down the sea level rise in their area. But American Canyon so far has done nothing, and they're going to be in trouble pretty soon. And so we in the Sierra Club are trying to work with the city council to get them to understand we have to respond to sea level rise.
Yeah, and so much of that can be almost getting out of the way and letting nature do its thing. One of the things that like Marin County has done, lots of other people's, is you set back your levee a fair ways and you create something called a living levee, where you make it as naturally a shoreline as you possibly can in front of your sort of barrier levee that's actually going to stop serious floodwaters from like flooding a city. So you give it a bunch of space, and it turns out that as marsh plants grow in those spaces, as sediment comes in because of tides, that level of that living levee, that wetland, slowly rises as sea level rises. And so it kind of continues to be that buffer almost automatically as sea level rises. It's a slow process, but it seems to keep pace even with the rapider sea level rise that we're seeing now. And once you build that levee, it's basically free. It does it all by itself. You just have to get out of nature's way and give it the space to work.
So Hamilton Wetlands is one of the areas there where they've really worked on replanting.
Yeah, Hamilton
by
was
the old
beautiful.
Air Force Base.
Yeah.
And took a field trip.
Hamilton Wetlands is wonderful. I love it.
I
Was there a question?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I have a comment, Mark and everybody. Aaron, first of all, thank you for being a speaker tonight. I'm really excited that you accepted this responsibility, and I'm really interested in what you're doing. I've met you I think 2 or 3 years ago over at Lagoon Valley to one of their open houses, and I knew you would be a good speaker, so I gave them, and I'm glad you're here. But going back to your definition of what a delta is, and I really appreciate how you defined it, and I can see why it's defined the way you mentioned it and explained it. But my understanding, if there's a definition for the San Francisco Bay Delta, and I've done a lot of research on this, you have to go back to 1923 when Edwin Markham, another California native son, wrote the book California the Wonderful. It's one of the first, I think, wonderful guides about California. And he said, he defined the Bay Delta where it's the confluence where the Sacramento meets the San Joaquin River, and of course it goes into the San Francisco Bay. Okay. I have a lot of questions for you, but I just want to point out one more item, if you don't mind, and I don't think the rest of our members will mind. And I appreciate your comments on Solano County and, California, whatever. Anyway, but I want to say to you, I'm not sure you're aware, but right now the Bay Nature magazine, there's a writer there, Tavi. They're looking for us or somebody who's an expert like you to comment if you can explain the decline of birds in Solano County. So that's your call. I respect that, but I thought I'd bring it up to your attention. That's it. Thank you.
Roberto.
Yeah, thank you for the heads up on that. That sounds like a cool opportunity. Your comment about the Delta and the Bay's interaction is a really good one, though, because there are a lot of people that really, to paint the full picture, it's the Bay Delta estuary. So you sort of take them, they're so
correct,
and they exchange so much in terms of water and nutrients and biology that it's really almost silly to try to cut them off too hard and do just one or the other. Taken together is a really smart way of going about it. It's a good point.
There's a great
I agree with you.
Roberto, there's a great question in the chat, which is with the conversion of point raised ranches back to the more native habitat, I don't know if you read this, in the works, what might be the effect on tricolored blackbirds that spend the winter there, mostly in the cattle ranches, which are being let go? It seems most of the blackbirds, as well as ravens and pigeons, are dependent on the presence of cattle. So,
great question.
I'm glad you point out about the tricolored blackbird, because it's considered one of the 37 species that the proposed habitat conservation plan of Solano County is focused on. Anyway, but my definition of the Bay Delta, and to add a little bit more imagination, is that you have to imagine a sandhill crane going into the Delta, extending its wings. And if you look at the map more closely, you will see why. I've done a painting of that, but that's what my definition of the Bay Delta is. So it's up to us to preserve it or lose it.
yeah, let's listen
Thank
to
you.
his answer to the ranching question.
Yeah, so the idea here is, again, does everybody know what's happening in Outer Point Rays right now? So historically, for the past 150-ish years, there have been these dairy farms out in the Outer Point. There are, I can't remember, 24 ranches across the Outer Point. And they have had cows on that landscape, grazing that land for 150-ish years. But now the Park Service is changing things around, and the Nature Conservancy has come in, and they're sort of having those ranchers now move off. They sort of bought them out of the remainders of their leases or whatever. So now the concern is, okay, if the ranchers leave and they take their cows with them, what will happen? One of the big concerns is that all the invasive species that the cows have been eating all these years are just gonna pop up like crazy. So there's a plan in place to sort of transition things slowly, because there is a big grazing ungulate that is native to the Point Rays that are already out there in some numbers, and those are the elk. There are a bunch of elk that live out there. And so if we can slowly reduce the number of cows and sort of pull back the fences that are holding the elk out, the elk numbers will increase and hopefully function in the same sort of ecosystem niche and continue to hit those invasive species and keep them down and preserve the habitat for the tricolored blackbirds.
Sure, perfect. So how many have been to Point Reyes? The elk herds are really increasing. In fact, that was one of the reasons they decided to have the farms leave, because there was tension between the farmers who didn't want the elks eating the grass that the cows depended on. So it's going to be a transition for sure. We'll keep our fingers crossed that the elk can do as well as the cows. Maybe not as much manure, but
certainly not as concentrated in
just
small areas that it is now. Some of those silage ponds are ripe.
Yeah. Other questions about the Delta? My biggest concern from what I heard is one little earthquake could
Yeah.
really cause a real shambles out there.
Yeah, it always makes me really
yeah.
uncomfortable when I talk with certain groups who just don't want to do anything. You're like, oh, just let nature take its
Yeah,
course.
uh-huh.
It's like, okay, that will work eventually. But what those people are gambling on is that for the next like 200 years or so, we're not going to have a major earthquake in California. And to me, that seems like a terrible gamble.
Yeah, 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 yeah. For people that are birders, we've found a Bell's vireo nesting out in the Delta.
Nice.
And there hadn't been one in probably 40 years, so out on one of the islands there.
That's
And
awesome.
you can't really get to that island much anymore. There's people that live there that don't like visitors, but yeah. Anyways, there is a Bell's vireo, which are more common in way Southern California and Arizona more than here, yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's cool bird.
Other-
Cool.
yeah,
Thank you again very much.
yeah. All right, so the books, I looked through that book, the illustrations, I haven't had a chance to read much of the text, but the illustrations are amazing.
Martha is
Yeah,
super
take a look at that book, it's amazing, yeah.
Yeah,
Online folks, thank you very much, I appreciate it. And our next meeting is Thursday, May 7th, the first Thursday of the month. Talk to you soon.
good. How do we get hold of a copy of Aaron's book?
There's some right here, I'll ask him, I'll try to find out that answer.
Yeah, tell you what, get me one, I'll buy it I'll buy it.
Okay, sounds like a deal.
Thanks.
All right.
Did I miss the whole thing?
Oh, Jesus. Where have you been, boy?
Huh?
Where have you been?
I was out birding.
Oh, my God.
I got access to the, Karen took me to the IBRRC and the walk in the marsh thing.
Oh, to her place?
Well, you have to go through
Pacific
this.
Flyway?
Well, yeah, but now it's the CW, like California Waterfowl just took it over. So there's new owners of the whole thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
So
that.
she just met them. Yeah.
Huh. Will we have
They're
access?
painful.
I hope.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But I mean, so like I asked if I could go, and they were like, she can take you in, and they're like, how about tonight? And I'm like, I wanted to see this guy.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
like,
he's
tonight?
really.
I'm like,
Well, we recorded it. It'll be on our website in a couple of days.
oh, it is?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. He's really knowledgeable. I don't know if you
Yeah, I'm kind of into the
Yeah.
Delta stuff.
I'm
So.
trying to.
Great. Thank him again. Amazing talk.
All righty. Yep. Thanks, Phil. Okay, let's
Was
do
somebody on
that. Well, we had like 30 people online. So.
Ah. Hello, Robin. How are you?
Okay.
Good.
Did you say Bell Sparrow?
Bell's vireo.
Oh, they fall in Yolo?
In Yolo, well, we found one out in the Delta, Lucas and I and his friend. Yeah.
Let's see.